Good afternoon, and thank you so much for being here with us today for the third in our GIS informational series for the summer of 2025. We have with us today Jessica Byerman from GeoCom, and she's going to present on GIS data readiness for NextGen 911. So thank you so much for being here with us, Jessica, and I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, so my name is Jessica Byerman. I'm a GIS solutions engineer with GeoCom. I've been with GeoCom for close to 19 years in various roles. Started out as a GIS specialist, then a GIS supervisor for a few years, and then actually most recently a GIS project manager. And then I switched to this role just a couple of months ago. So I've been working on GIS data readiness with jurisdictions for many, many years. And one of my passions really is the coming up with workflow documentation and best practices. So we'll get into the presentation here. So the purpose is that I want to help you understand the role of GIS and Next Generation 911, learn some best practices for data readiness, and then explore strategies for documenting your workflows, because that's very important to have that in place. And I know it can be somewhat overwhelming to start out with. And why does all this matter so much? Accurate GIS data is critical for emergency response. So it is going to determine where any 911 calls are routed in the next generation 911 system. Because the next or NG9-1-1 relies on spatial data for call routing and the location validations. The location validation meaning ensuring that any addresses in the database actually find a valid location prior to any 911 call occurring. So some NG9-1-1 fundamentals, some definitions and goals are NG9-1-1, or Next Generation 911, which is a digital IP-based system. And what's great about it, and enhances legacy 911 greatly, is that it enables voice, text, images, and even video to be transmitted to PSAPs. In addition to, currently you get a phone number and an address or a geodetic location, and then voice information. And then if you do have to transfer a call to another PSAP for any reason, or even just to a responder, all that information has to be documented by the call taker and then transmitted, possibly just reworded or reiterated on a call. Where with Next Gen 911, you can transmit all that information at once and it can get transferred over, and it's also documented and can help with response to a call. Key components are the Emergency Services IP network, either referred to as ESINet or ESINet. And then there's a location information server, or a LIS. This is what's going to replace your legacy ALI database eventually. So where your telephone records currently are, in the future they will be validated against the location validation function, or LVF. And then once they are validated, they get stored in the location information server, or LIS, so that they can be used when a call comes in. And then the emergency call routing function, or ECRF, that's also in your ESINet in the system, that houses your GIS data just like the LVF does. So then when that validated LIS record is activated when a call comes in, it gets sent to the ECRF and can determine the correct location, and based on that location, so that point, whether it's a geodetic location or a civic address, we'll find a polygon that it falls into, and that polygon will have something called a URI value. It's a unique address, internet address for each PSAP, and that's how it determines where to route the call. And so that's it's also helpful for transferring calls too. So some of the importance of the standards. So why are they critical? They help ensure interoperability across jurisdictions, and then also facilitate data sharing and integration. One great example I got recently when I was at a GIS conference in North Carolina was that one of the GIS specialists from a county in the north Western region. She went and assisted during Hurricane Helene, had to go to another county that was offline and needed to help create some maps. And she brought a lot of information with her, so just on a flash drive, just in case she couldn't, they would still be offline and she couldn't get online to get all her information stored in the cloud. So she brought that with her, but she said what was very helpful is that the data in the county that she went to assist followed the exact same schema. She had switched to the next Gen 911 schema. They had also done that. So she didn't need to do a lot of research to determine what each attribute, which each field meant, and how those attributes should be used. She knew quickly because they followed that same standard. So it really helps out with that interoperability. And then the sharing portion too. Yes, you can write scripts or manually change the schema so that you can merge data together if you need surrounding information. But if the schema in at least the fields that you require to be merged are the same, well, that makes that process a lot simpler. And some key standards to know are the NINA STA 006 or 006 is GIS data model for next generation 911. That's currently, I think it's in public review. So we should have version 3 coming out here over the next couple of months. There are some changes in there that will hopefully then be fairly static into the future. And then we have the next generation 911 United States Civic Location Data Exchange format. And you'll hear the Civic Location Data Exchange format quite a bit, CLDXF. We'll talk a little bit about that too further into the presentation. I have some screenshots of tables showing how street names are parsed out in that CLDXF format. And then we have a standard for I3 standard for next generation 911, and then some like an FGDC standards for like metadata and spatial accuracy. So all those things are good to know, be familiar with, to something that you can follow and also include when you do develop your workflows and process documentation so that that information can be referenced. Some GIS data best practices. Data accuracy and completeness are really important. So you want to ensure like your address points, road center lines, and all the boundary layers. So your PSAP boundary, of course, one of the primary ones because that's what's used to route calls. And then you have a provisioning boundary, which isn't specifically used for call routing or in the ECRF, but it's used to control the area that you're responsible for. So that way, if all provisioning boundaries are aligned with all your neighbors and you ensure all the other data you have is in that provisioning boundary, doesn't fall outside, or there's no gaps where your fire boundary or PSAP don't cover that provisioning boundary, that ensures an alignment with neighbors. So that's what that's useful for. And then your fire, law, and EMS boundaries. Yeah, you can definitely have additional boundary layers for responders. It doesn't just limit you to those fire, law, and EMS, not those 3, but those are the basic ones that are required. So you want to make sure those are all current. So boundaries are based on where your actual response areas are and that they're complete, so they have that full coverage. Other things for completeness and accuracy includes things like the attributes for street names, address ranges, jurisdictional info, and in address points, it'd be the house number and street name and community or jurisdictional information. You want to make sure those are, accurate, but also that they're consistent. So if your spelling should be correct and be consistent across the board for different street names and your jurisdictional information. So to ensure that happens, you want to have some data validation steps in place. I'd recommend using automated tools to check for these things because it should be repeatable and an efficient process. So you want to check for things like topological errors, unintentional gaps, overlaps, and then attribute consistency. And this is something that could be done through having a domain table. So your street type field has a list of values. Those are the only values that the GIS data editor can choose. So that ensures that they're always consistent. Or you could have tables that have all your street name components in there, like a master street name list, and use that for comparison. So write some scripts that check that regularly, or that are set up in such a way that you can only fill in those existing street names into your road center line street name components, or into your address point streets too. And then that would of course be updated as you have new roads. And then complying with a schema. So making sure that any values that are mandatory, things like that street name component, or the house number, the address points, or the range fields, or your community information, state information, do you have those fields there? And then are they also 100% populated, because those are considered required or mandatory? So having checks in place that will do that. Confirm those things for you every time that you make updates before you push your data out to any other systems. So whether that's in the PSAP or in the future to the state's next generation 911 system. Here I wanted to show an example of a problem that you might run into if you have gaps between PSAP boundaries. Let's say your jurisdiction that has a couple of PSAP that you're responsible for. This right here shows an area, the highlighter works here, where there's a gap. So neither PSAP A or B have that coverage area. There are rules in the EZInet that can be put into place, like policy routing rules. That's another function in there that could say, PSAP A is actually offline because of, maybe there's no staff, or it's some weather event occurred. And a rule can be put in place saying, all right, anything that has the PSAP A's URI value or address in the ECRF, instead automatically just send that over to PSAP B. Or, those are routing rules that are in place and can be switched on and off. But in this case, if there's a gap, usually there's a rule set in the ECRF that says, oh, I couldn't find a location. It's this. The call or the caller's location fell into a gap, so I couldn't find the PSAP to send it to. Now I should find maybe the closest boundary, or maybe there's just a rule that says, okay, any time it falls in the gap, it goes to PSAP F. So it gets sent to maybe somewhere completely different across the state. But if let's just find the closest one. Well, 116 would be closer to PSAP B, but maybe it actually should be sent to PSAP A. So that would cause delays in response if a call is sent to the wrong PSAP. Another problem in this image here that I'm showing, or this example, is this whole street segment, it's cut off in the middle here. So best practice is that any road segment is split when there's a boundary change. So in this case, if this whole street should be in PSAP B, for example, you'd want to change this boundary so that A doesn't cover that little piece. Same down here, there's no addresses in this area, but it's still a small gap. So what if someone calls from a cell phone? So it's based on the location of the device. Maybe it'll fall into this gap. Again, couldn't be sent to the correct PSAP and would slow down that response time, or delay that response time. In this case, also, this one segment here is kind of cut off in the middle rather than the boundaries being snapped and going around the roads, or the roads being broken where the boundary changes. So to make corrections to this, go on the next screen here. Now we have PSAP A covering this road and all the addresses on it completely. And then this little gap down here was covered by as well. And the boundary was changed to ensure that this whole segment, there's no ambiguity. Let's say if an address is toward the end of the segment, if it were interpolated off of a road, it wouldn't accidentally fall into the correct or an incorrect boundary. So this is a way to ensure that. And then you'll work to align with your neighbors so that when a data set is aggregated into your statewide data set for the ECRF to use for routing, there's no question where a call should be sent. These are some examples of those CLDXF fields and the legacy fields compared to each other. So you're probably used to having maybe not these exact 4 field names, legacy street pre-directional, legacy street name, legacy street type, and legacy street post-directional, but you probably have some representation of those in your data. And those should generally be following the standard that's used in your master street address guide and therefore in your ALLY database. So that's, to ensure that if a call comes in, that address matches one-to-one, either an address point or can be interpolated off of a road center line. So a next generation 911, rather than following that USPS standard, so US Postal Service standard that Nina recommends for the MSAG and ALLY database, instead of that, it's an international standard that parses those 4 fields out into 8 separate fields. So everything starting here from the street pre-modifier down to the street post modifier. Most of the time, you're not going to have to fill in all of these. Like this US Highway 221, everything should be spelled out and should be in proper case, and it's parsed out into the pre-type field and into the street name field. So only the number would go into the street name portion. You can have, I wouldn't recommend updating both manually each time you add a new road. I would set up some rules like auto attribution rules that will parse information for you. Usually it's easier to go from further something that's parsed out into 8 down into 4 fields rather than the other way. But you can set up rules that would say, all right, if I find something that says US space HWY, translate that into the pre-type field and name it United States Highway, and then pull that street number out, just the value of the number out into the street name field. Another example would be like Avenue. If it's Avenue A or Avenue B, Avenue would be here, the A, B, C, for that, the name of the avenue would come into the street name field. Or state highway or interstate, those are all pre-types. So those are some examples. You see there's one called a street pre-separator. So that you may not have any examples of this in your jurisdiction. Some of them would, one example that you're allowed is like Avenue of the Americas. So Avenue would be in the pre-type, of the would be in the pre-type separator, and Americas would be in the street name. If you don't have any street names in your jurisdiction that follow, have a pre-type separator, then there's no need to actually have that field in your local data. But if you want to follow the NINA standard completely and just have that available, you can include that and have the full 8 street name components. I know some of this on the right is a little bit smaller here, but I wanted to show an example too of this old Aberdeen Road. Old in this case, then in the CLDXF fields, gets parsed out and goes into the pre-modifier. And then the Aberdeen is in the street name and road spelled out against proper case again in the street type field. An example of a post modifier could be something like extension or ramp. In your legacy street name, you see how the street name gets everything. Richmond Road Extension is all together in the street name. It's because while the road should normally go into the street type field, there's no additional field available for that EXT for extension. So in that case, you do have to put everything together just in that street name field. And in the CLDXF, the idea is to have everything parsed out completely to separate components so they can individually be matched when a call comes in. This is just an example of a mobile home park and addressing. I know there's a variety of ways that jurisdictions address mobile home parks. Sometimes it's just a single address at the entrance, and maybe if there's hundreds of mobile homes and they all just have individual lot numbers but are tied to that main address, it's a little harder to make sure that it's not a very precise location. You still have to have that lot number information and direct people to it. So if you actually had any roads in a mobile home park, if they're named and then each gets their own address. It's very specific where you can find that location, and that means you can route the emergency vehicles there a lot quicker too. So while it's not required, this is just, best practice to give them individual house numbers rather than only lot numbers with one main address. Or even if you had just maybe a couple roads in there, then it wouldn't be as hard to find based on lot numbers as long as they are still in your data and displayed, so you can dispatcher can direct the responder where to go, or even if they're, each street name just has maybe a single address with those lot numbers. But yeah, having the house numbers, individual house numbers for each, and then the signage up would be best practice. So just wanted to put that in as an example. Something to consider, and definitely something to document for your addressing ordinance that should be utilized in your processes. So now we're going to get to the workflow documentation. So why is it important to document workflows? Well, it helps ensure consistency and repeatability. Also aids in training and onboarding. So if you have a team of people working together, or maybe just one individual that has to handle all this work within your county, you want to be sure to be consistent with that, and then also have it repeatable, as in that's so you're efficient when you're doing the work. But what if you leave, or what if someone else needs to come in and assist? Well, then you have that documentation as a starting point to ensure that they are also being, consistent and following the same processes that you're following. So yeah, it helps if you have new people coming in for training and onboarding them, but also helps ensure that you're following a process, and that if you do leave, then that information is readily available for the next people. They're not scrambling and searching like, oh, was this done previously? What's the logic behind it? It can continue. The process can continue smoothly, and all the work that you do to ensure that the data is kept current, the addresses are present, everything is being sent to the PSAP for use, and also sent into use for next generation 911, and that can happen without any hiccups. Things that you should document are data sources and acquisition methods. So let's say you have multiple municipalities within your jurisdiction. You need to gather information from them because maybe they handle the addressing there, or even the street naming. Document that. Like, who do you actually reach out to, or who reaches out to you with that information, and what format do they provide that information, and what type of QC do you do on that before you add that to your master data. Having that documented is a great reference to have. And then having editing and validation procedures. So what's your process for when you receive new road information? Do you go to the developer and ask them for CAD drawings? Do they provide the data in GIS? Do they maybe use a web application you make available to draw in those roads and add the new points? And then what's your process for ensuring that the addresses that they're proposing follow your addressing scheme, aren't causing any kind of overlaps? And then also timeline, when you get data from someone or a new address request, what's your turnaround time, and who do you communicate with when those updates do need to occur? Really good thing, I guess, for think about too for next generation 911 is how do you communicate with your neighboring jurisdictions to ensure those PSAP boundaries are aligned, and that working with the fire departments, working with law enforcement to ensure those boundaries are all correct. That's all stuff that should be documented. And then roles and responsibilities, which department and which role within that department has which responsibilities, who provides the information that you need, who actually edits the data, and then how often are updates sent out to the PSAP. And how do you ensure backups are made so that in case something happens to your data, you can go back and what date it's from and what kind of changes you may need to apply that were lost, if there is a data loss. And so that you're not overwhelmed with this, just starting out with one portion, documenting, for example, all your data sources and acquisition methods, and just getting that going, and then working on as you're doing editing, jot down how you do the process, take screenshots along the way, and then validation procedures. So yeah, your quality assurance, making sure what you have added is correct and there aren't any problems with the data. Do you do that on the fly? Do you do that every night? Do you do it on a weekly basis? Are there ways for you to maybe be more efficient by having someone develop scripts for you, or if you're able to develop your own scripts that you run through on a regular, cadence, so that that frequency is consistent too. So don't feel like you have to have everything documented, but get started with something, and then also working together with other stakeholders, having meetings and doing some brainstorming on how current processes work. And so those are documented. And then once that's documented, and it doesn't have to be in a formal way yet, then do some more brainstorming. How could we improve this? Like what were our bottlenecks here? Why does it maybe take multiple days to get something done when it really could be done within 1 day or 1 hour? And so then there's definitely, by doing all that brainstorming documentation, there's always places where you can find some improvement opportunities. So this is an example of just a workflow diagram. So, it could be one overview diagram that's more general, and then from there you could have sub-diagrams that you link to that talk about, maybe even for each individual city in your jurisdiction, in your county, how do you get addresses from each individual one? If they're different processes. If they're the same process, great. One document's good. Makes life a little bit simpler. And then what are your QC processes? And have detail in there. And this is really a supplement to your process documentation or your standard operating procedures. This can be included in there, just as screenshots, or you could have links in your SOP documentation if someone wants to see the breakdown of the workflow rather than in bullet format or numbered list format. Go to this workflow diagram, and then you can see step by step how the process works. So you get from an address request to adding that point to your GIS data to ensuring it has all the correct underlying attributes, like your emergency service number, your MSEG community, the correct street name. How does it fit all the ranges? Do another QC step. How's all that done to the resident being notified of the new address? And maybe other stakeholders within the community, how are they notified when that information has come full circle? So that's where these diagrams are, just a helpful visual enhancement of standard operating procedures. And here I have an example of a table of contents that could be used for your standard operating procedures for next generation 9-1-1 GIS data maintenance. So like I said, you don't have to do the whole thing at once. I would just recommend starting with portions of it. Like, your scope would be, okay, what do you want to actually cover? And then data sources, where are you getting all your information from? Do that brainstorming, come up with a whole list, and then just keep enhancing that documentation. You can work together with other departments and doing the brainstorming and have someone take lead on developing the documentation, or there are vendors that provide that service too, where you can have a third party come in, sit down, and listen to everyone provide input during those brainstorming sessions, start the documentation, and then work with you to ensure that the information that was captured is correct and then presented in an organized way. So this is just an example of something you can use and reference. So a little more deeper into the implementation strategy portion of how for next generation 9-1-1. First, assess your current GIS data readiness. So having quality control checks done to see if your road center lines are complete. Do your addresses match your road center lines? Do you have all of the fields? Either are you using the next generation 9-1-1 data schema, as a base, or do you at least have all the fields that are mandatory and possibly conditional, like a pre-directional or post-directional? Those are, not every feature has those, but some features do have them, so you do need to have those fields too. Are those present in your data? And after that assessment's done, figure out where there are any gaps, then you'd start prioritizing the improvements. So maybe step one is, okay, we don't have all the fields for Next Gen 911. What should we do to first change it? What do we need to go through to change our schema to meet that? What end use systems would be affected, or people that use our data will be affected by these changes? So make sure everyone's notified and a plan is put in place for updating any end use systems to utilize the new schema. And then from there, make sure everything's populated correctly. And then see, after the standardization's done, are there any address points that don't match your road center lines? Is that because the road is missing or the street name is misspelled in the road center line layer? Or is it because the address point has a misspelling and that needs to be corrected? Take your alley database, so your telephone records, run a synchronization check against both your points and roads. Can you find, the goal is 98%, but really the real goal should be 100% if possible of all actual valid addresses in your telephone record database. Do they match your data? And if they don't, figure out, either correct them, standardize the naming in one or the other, the alley database or in your GIS data. And then any that are missing, make sure those points are added. You may need to go out in the field to verify the actual locations, confirm house numbers and location of points. And once that part's done, you can also, look at spatial alignment. As long as your roads and points fall into the correct PSAP and into the correct response boundaries, that spatial alignment isn't quite as critical when it comes to Next Gen 911 call routing, but it's good for other uses in the PSAP. You want to have your points in your roads be aligned to where they're actually on the ground. So yeah, after you do, that's you develop that improvement plan. So go through of the schema first, and then improving synchronization and standardization of your street name components. And then once all that's done, make sure that any staff that needs to work on this to maintain the data is trained. Also, make sure your stakeholders are fully aware of the efforts that are being done and what the benefits are of having that done. And then test and validate the data in the Next Gen 911 system. Because you'll have to work with your neighbors too, collaborate with them so that you ensure that your boundaries are aligned. So when the data is sent into the state's Next Gen system, all those PSAP boundaries, there's no gaps, no overlaps, everyone's in agreement. And another thing to keep in mind, county boundary lines are often very, precise. If you're not in agreement with your neighbor exactly on those boundary lines, maybe one has had them surveyed, the other county, your neighboring county hasn't. The most important part is that your provisioning and PSAP boundaries are aligned and that they, cover the right addresses. But if they're off by a couple feet from your county boundary or not as precise as your county boundary, that's okay. It's acceptable. Don't feel too rigid when it comes to that. And so yeah, collaboration on all of this is key. Make sure you work with your PSAPs, your jurisdiction, to ensure that any end-use systems aren't affected by the changes you make, and also get feedback from them on where they see improvements can be made. They might have noticed addresses that are missing. Work with IT on backing up the data and just ensuring there's a good process in place there. Any other GIS departments you might have. Maybe you work specifically just with the PSAP and there's other GIS departments. Well, can you collaborate with them on getting information from them or exchanging information to ensure their data is also current? And then, with any vendors that you work with, so any end-use systems that you have, ensuring that there aren't any negative effects, or if you find out what the effects are, so you can plan for them when you do make schema and data changes. And we have some tools and resources. So recommended ones I have is quality control and quality assurance tools based on the standards and your local requirements. So there's, you can do something at the state level, and then most likely you will. Or it can also be done though at the local level so you can ensure your data is in good shape before you pass it on to the state and before it then goes into the EZNet. So have that established, and then automated standardized QC checks that are easily repeatable and that they're configurable. So making sure that there's a list of values, like domain values, that each field gets checked against. Okay, making sure that your attributes follow those standards, making sure on topology side there aren't any gaps or overlaps. Your fire law, EMS, and PSAP boundaries completely cover that provisioning boundary, but having that easily repeatable, meaning having scripts in place or purchasing tools that allow you to just upload your data. It runs through the process, you get results, you can keep your data as clean as possible. So it's easily repeatable. And the reason that configurable is important when you're making choices with this is because you might have different local needs than, other neighboring counties or even other neighboring states, and things that are different from just what's in the NINA standard. So you want it to be configurable so that the QC checks can be customized for you too. Things that you can use, some tools like Esri's ArcGIS Pro Attribute Assistant, that can be set up so that you do have your rules, like South Main Street from the legacy fields is fully spelled out and parsed out properly into your CLDXF fields. You can set up rules for that. You can set up rules that will populate state, county, country, city, all based on the underlying polygons automatically. So you don't have to manually enter that each time you edit or add a feature. And then some training and support recommendations would be NINA webinars and workshops that are available. I would also strongly recommend to be part of a NINA work group. I'm part of a couple of them, the next GIS for Next Gen Core Services work group and the GIS Data Stewardship, which isn't currently active, but they will be further developing those documents. And it's really helpful to listen to what others, from people from across the nation. There's vendors, there's people at the state level, people at regional levels, cities and counties that are all invested and bring all their knowledge together to create standards documents and informational documents. And then you can also look at consulting services from a vendor that is experienced with both legacy and next-gen 911 systems and implementations. They can help provide guidance. So got down to the Q&A session, and Jennifer, do you have anything you wanted to add or ask me about as you were listening?
I don't. I think this was a fantastic presentation, and I very much appreciate your time in bringing it to us. Do you have anything to add as we close?
I do have one final slide, the closing remarks. So some key takeaways is that GIS is foundational to next-gen 911 success. Standards and best practices ensure data quality, and then workflow documentation is what supports the sustainability. So I think it's very important to have documentation done. Recommendations are for next steps to get involved in work groups, as I had mentioned, anything related to next generation 911 components, and there's a whole host of work groups that you can find on the nina.org website, and just request to be added, and they'll welcome you. And usually they meet on a weekly basis. My experience, about an hour and a half once a week. Then read up on and participate in Colorado's efforts toward the next generation 911 implementation, and then begin or continue your GIS readiness journey so you're prepared. And feel free to reach out to me or to Tyler, our territory sales manager, if you have any follow-up questions.
This is awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and present this third in our GIS informational series for 2025. I very much appreciate you, and I know we'll have you back for sessions later in the series and for our panel Q&A in October. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.